Today we're going to do something pretty wild. We're reaching back, way back, over 4,000 years to check out some of the oldest advice ever written down. And the crazy part? It's shockingly relevant to our lives right now.
So let me ask you this. What if one of the first books in history wasn't some epic myth or a list of kings, but, well, more like a self-help guide? Almost like an ancient advice column on how to live a good, successful life.
I mean, just get a load of this quote from the text. Ways to avoid argumentative persons and cultivate self-control. Doesn't that sound like something you'd read on a mindfulness blog today? Except this was written around 2400 BC. Just incredible.
And all of this brings us right into our first section. Let's call it the world's oldest life hacks.
Okay, so this advice we're talking about comes from a work called the Maxims of Ptahhotep. Scholars call it one of the very first examples of wisdom literature, which is basically a genre of writing designed to teach young people how to act right and, get ahead in the world. Now, this isn't just a random list of tips. It's all built on this core Egyptian idea called ma'at. You can think of ma'at as this grand concept of cosmic order, truth, balance, and harmony. The whole point of these maxims was to teach you how to live your life in a way that keeps everything in balance.
And the topics it covers are just amazing. It gets into everything from table manners to how you should act around powerful people. It's even got handy hints for a husband. It was really meant to be a complete guide to being a successful person back then.
So who was the wise man behind all this? Well, it's time to meet the guy himself, Vizier Ptahhotep. The book is credited to this man, Ptahhotep. He was a vizier, which is kind of like a prime minister, and he served during Egypt's 5th dynasty. Now, to put that into perspective for you, that's actually closer in time to when the Great Pyramids were built than it is to us today. Mind-boggling, right?
And believe me, this guy was a big deal. The list of his official titles is just staggering. He was the city administrator, he ran the treasury, he managed all the king's official documents, he was in charge of the food supply, and he oversaw all royal construction projects. I mean, he was basically running the entire country.
But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. Because like a lot of things from deep geek history, we've got a bit of an authorship mystery on our hands.
At first glance, the book seems totally clear about it. The opening line literally says it's the instruction of the Vizier Ptahhotep under the majesty of King Isesi. Okay, seems pretty straightforward. Case closed, right?
Well, not so fast. The traditional view says, yep, Ptahhotep wrote it back in the Old Kingdom. But there's another theory, a more modern one, that suggests the authorship is fictional. That it was actually written hundreds of years later, in the Middle Kingdom, and they just put Ptahhotep's famous name on it to give it some authority.
So why do scholars think that? Well, it really comes down to the physical evidence. The oldest copies of the text we've ever found, like the famous priest papyrus, only date back to the Middle Kingdom. That's centuries after Ptahhotep was alive. And that gap in time is what this whole debate is about. But here's the thing. Whether he actually wrote the book or not, the man himself was 100% real. And he left behind a legacy that's absolutely undeniable, one carved in stone. This is what we know for sure. Vizier Ptahhotep was buried in this magnificent tomb called a mastaba, over at the famous burial ground of Saqqara. This tomb is our physical link to him, and it proves just how important this guy really was. And we're not talking about some simple grave here. His mastaba had this grand entrance with pillars, a huge inner court, and rooms just covered in these incredibly detailed carvings. It even had something called a false door, which the Egyptians believed was a magical portal that let his spirit travel between our world and the afterlife. And the plot thickens. The mystery doesn't just stop with the book. There's one final debate about Ptahhotep himself, about what happened to his reputation after he died. And the big question is, was this guy so revered that he was eventually worshipped as a god? And, you guessed it, scholars are split. One theory says yes, he was fully deified, worshipped like any other god. But a more recent idea suggests he was considered one of the distinguished dead. That means he was held in super high esteem, way above normal people, but maybe just a step below being an actual full-blown god.
So, in the end, whether he was an author, a legend, or even a god, Ptahhotep's name and his wisdom have survived for over 4,000 years. And that leaves us with one last really interesting question to think about. What advice from our time do you think would still matter 4,000 years from now?